in today's episode of our podcast, we're going to talk a little bit about perfectionism. Now, as a counselor, I see high performing clients, and without fail, they have one trait in common, and that is perfectionism. They hold themselves to a really high standard and they really knock themselves out trying to do their absolute best at work and at life. And to find out more about this, is it a positive thing, or is there maybe a little bit of a darker side to it that perhaps you need help managing? We are joined now by Carla Henry. Carla is the founder of the Purpose Collective. She's spent over 25 years coaching global companies on how to deliver effective transformational change. She is an organizational psychologist and also a leadership development expert. And I'm proud to say that she's also my very good friend. And we've had more than one glass of wine together, Carla, full disclosure, right?
Yes, indeed. Indeed.
Well, it's wonderful having you here. Thank you so much for doing this and for joining us today. So, with all of your experience seeing clients all around the world, what comes up for you when I throw out the term perfectionism?
Yes. Well, when we talked about doing this and you invited me to think about this, what I've spent the last couple of weeks just really noticing is how many times that's been coming up in clients and in conversations. So I think the first thing to say is I don't think that any senior leader coming into a coaching conversation with me ever presents saying that they have an issue with their perfectionism. So normally it might come out that maybe somebody in their team or organization has given them feedback through maybe a 360 process, or maybe things are not going so well in some team dynamics. And that becomes a moment where they need to reflect on how well is this quality serving them? How is it serving their team? And what might they need to shift and do something different about?
That's a really good point because they're not usually aware of it when they first go in, but 360s are pretty good at picking up on it and then throwing it out and saying, hey, okay, this is something maybe we could work on. But it's usually considered by them, at least by clients, a silver lining, right? Because they have
Yeah,
done well and it has gotten them a long
yeah,
way in life.
absolutely. Yeah, I mean, I would say that most leaders who've reached high positions in organizations are doing so because they have that element of perfectionism. They really want to strive for high standards and excellence. And we also want our senior leaders to have that quality as well. It usually only becomes a problem when it's taking a toll on them or on people around them, in the form of, I would say, possibly, stress, burnout, dissatisfaction with the performance of their team. So I might hear leaders say things like, well, nobody can do this job as well as I can. Therefore, I don't have a talented team. Um, I can't find the talent I need to succeed me because they're just not as good as me. Yeah. And I guess for some people, it's the first time in their career that they're really realizing that there's a dark side to perfectionism because it's got them really far in their career journey. And possibly it's been such an ingrained, part of who they are through their childhood, their educational upbringing, particularly in Asia, which is obviously where we're both based. I think the educational system really, trains people to be perfect, be fast, be perfect, um, and never stop really.
Yeah, it is a tough one when you've grown up in a tough educational system and tough parenting as well, right? Because a
Yeah,
lot of parents will link love to achievement, and
yeah,
that sets you up for just always thinking, I've got to be perfect. I've got to hit every single thing out of the park,
yeah,
even though that's impossible for anyone to do.
of course. Yeah, and that usually leaks into kind of all parts of their life, right? Particularly maybe if I'm coaching female leaders, they've got, a self expectation that they have to be really high achieving at work, they have to be really high achieving mothers, their children must also be high achieving, and it's just so much burden to manage across all those aspects of your life.
Absolutely. Do you find this is a pattern that I've often picked up on, that high achievers, perfectionists who drive themselves really, really hard, they're so tough on themselves, and they pull it off. They do just fine
Yeah.
until they have kids. And then they're
Yes.
juggling so many different balls
100%.
that something's got to give, right?
Yeah. Well, I did read recently that actually high achieving women are at far greater risk of postnatal depression than women who would not define themselves as high achieving, because we're so used to being in control. And I say we because I probably put myself in that bucket as well, in terms of if you pre kids have been used to being able to put in extra hours, be in control, deliver above and beyond, and then you transition into having a family and you just can't do it all.
Yeah, it's not realistic, is it? And
No.
and and yet they beat themselves up for not being able to deliver to the same standard
Mhm.
that they could before.
Yeah,
So
absolutely.
yeah, it's a tough thing, and I put myself in that camp as well. And I'm only just learning now in my 50s to kind of lighten up a little bit
Yeah,
and realize, hey, it's okay if you don't hit everything out of the park. Um,
absolutely.
so let's talk a little bit more about the causes, because sometimes it's parents, sometimes it's schooling. I've often noticed as well that it could be if you have a sibling that needs a lot of
Mm.
help and the parents are focused on that sibling, there's a bit of an inner dialogue for a kid, and they go,
Mhm.
well, I'm just going to be the best kid that I can be, and I'm going to do everything perfectly, and I'm not going to cause any more trouble at home. And they almost sort of push down what their needs are as a child, and
Mhm.
it continues from there. There's so many different causes, and sometimes it's simply self-imposed, right?
Yeah, definitely. Like I would often ask leaders the question, that those with a really strong tendency to prove themselves or overprove themselves, or leaders who hold themselves or others to a really high standard. Sometimes I will ask themselves, who are they comparing themselves to in their own minds? Because often there's somebody that can date back, quite historically, to maybe somebody that they don't even have in their life anymore, but they went to school with, and they kind of track them on Facebook or LinkedIn to see what they're doing with their life now, and they're psychologically holding themselves accountable to whatever that other person has achieved, and measuring themselves against this baseline without really even knowing what's happening even in that other person's life. um, Sometimes it is, like you say, it's a parental expectation. Maybe it's even pitting siblings against each other. Like maybe they're the younger child, but the older sibling has done really well. So there's that constant sense of comparison, that they must be. But for some reason, I don't have any data on this, but intuitively, I feel first children are often the ones who are more perfectionistic than siblings born later. I don't know if you notice that also in your clients.
That's interesting. That's interesting. So why do you think that is? Do you have any theories on why?
Well, I mean, I can only relate it to my own experience of being a mum now. So I have two boys who are 11 and 14. And I don't really know if I knew how to be a mum. My oldest child is always teaching, the oldest child is always teaching the parent also how to be a parent, right? So you were maybe over engineering how to do parenting with your firstborn. Whereas by the time you have child number two or maybe three, depending on how many children you might have, you kind of got it. You're relaxed. You know that every child is going to be the way they are. There's no amount of your intense parenting that's going to change them. Um, but maybe a lot of children, maybe if they grow up as only single children with no siblings, parents only have one project to work on, and I think that can also really lead to right, I'm going to put all my energy in you. Um, I was also reading something yesterday, actually, with perfectionism kind of in my own lens for this week. And the guy was saying that if you were a parent and you were in any way ashamed of your children or their achievements, it's really reflecting more about your own ego than it is about the child. So I think often parents really want their children to be perfect in their own image because of what that says about them as parents versus genuinely being interested in the child's needs or wants.
How does all of this impact personal relationships? We'll get to the leadership
Yeah,
part in just a bit, but how does it impact personal relationships and those around? Because if you're that hard on yourself
mm,
and you hold yourself to this standard, you're going to be hard on those around you as well.
totally, totally. Um, I think this is an Oprah quote. We'll have to fact check our quotes, but I think it's her that says you can only love others as much as you love yourself. And I think as that relates to perfectionism, I think if you can't really love yourself, flaws and warts and all, then it is really hard to accept that everybody is perfectly flawed and none of us are perfect. We've all got our strengths and weaknesses. But if we can't acknowledge that in ourselves, we're really always setting ourselves up for disappointment in a way.
Yeah, absolutely. Okay, so how does this trait, perfectionism,
Yeah,
display when it comes to leadership? How does it manifest when it
yeah,
comes to effective leadership? Because you and I are both
yeah,
trained in the leadership circle, and we
we
know
are.
it's considered a reactive quality, right? It's
Yes,
it's it's good to a point, but
yeah,
after a while, it gives you diminishing returns. What have you
yes.
witnessed? What do you see?
Well, I would say that, I always look at it kind of reactive, creative, light side, dark side. So the real kind of light side of being discerning and having an attention to detail is probably, really great quality outputs, really, high standards, high performance. But as we both know, if you do too much of that, actually it's the opposite trait that you need to really relate and connect people. It actually pushes people away. So, as a senior leader, your role is really to help, to deliver through others. It becomes much less about you and your own perfectionism. It becomes around how you coach, develop, inspire other people to do what they need to do. And you inspire through vision, through purpose, through setting goals and ambition. But if you then micromanage how that happens, get disappointed when it's not everything not to your standard, then actually that becomes who wants to work for a leader that is constantly pointing out everything that is not good. You need a balance of this is working and this is not working. Um, and I do see that a lot. Obviously both of us are quite privileged to be in the inner worlds of many leaders, so they might share with us things that they wouldn't share with their peers and colleagues. And it's quite hard to be disappointed by the people that you're supposed to be leading. And one of the things I kind of suggest to leaders who feel disappointed by the teams they have is that one of the questions I ask them is, have you actually clearly articulated to your teams what success looks like for you? What is this perfect standard that you're looking for? Where are they now? And what is the gap that you want to actually help them fill? How can you inspire them to achievement versus demotivate them because all these things are not working?
Is it realistic though to if your standard is up here and they're working to here, and perhaps you've lost sight of the practical compromises that are necessary
Yeah.
to help get them further up the scale. Is it realistic to want them to come up to your level, or is it where do you draw the line?
Well, I think firstly, what I would say to leaders, kind of back to our child conversation, is that you can have different expectations of different people in your organization at different points in time. So you're not going to expect a graduate with 5 years experience to be able to deliver at the same level as, the me's and you's in our late 40s, 50s. The level of experience we've got is very different to somebody with 5 years experience. So, the role a leader needs to play with different types of generations in an organization, it needs to be very customized, because otherwise you absolutely can't expect all your employees to have to be you, because they don't have that many years of experience as you. So often that can be just a really something that people have not thought about. You wouldn't expect a 5-year-old child to be attaining the same as a 10-year-old child or a 15-year-old child. But leaders often just look at their teams with not a level of customization about what could be expected by somebody with that different level of experience.
So nuance is incredibly important.
Yeah,
And by introducing that concept, perhaps they start to realize, okay, I've had this feedback on my 360.
yeah,
I'm understanding the origin of why I'm a perfectionist and how difficult that can be. And
yeah.
perhaps there's room to soften my approach.
Yeah, although I was having got this feedback myself in leadership roles, I think I was sharing with you as we were preparing. I remember getting in a team review in my last job, getting some feedback from people in the team, so that they didn't want to work with me on particular client accounts because they couldn't deliver against what they perceived as my very high expectations for what we should be doing. And I did spend a little bit of time really thinking, well, maybe my expectations are too high, and maybe I need to lower my standards about what I can expect from that team. But the truth is, my clients are expecting us to deliver to those standards. So if client wants this and team doesn't think that it's their job to deliver that, then the leader or the manager in the middle is always the one feeling the stress point of, well, we do need to deliver here, and actually I need to get these team members to step up. So I found, like, if I reframed real clarity of, look, it is my expectation that we get to this level of quality and management with our clients. I will do everything to help you get there. I'm very willing to support and coach you. But if you are not willing to develop and grow, this probably isn't the best project or team for you to work on. So I think it is really important for high achieving leaders to also, share what they are expecting of their teams, because not every team member will want to work at that standard or pace. But I know I want people who do want to work like that on my team.
Right. So you are fulfilling your duty and your obligation to
Yeah,
the organization by maintaining your standards. So it sounds like what you're saying is the communication. You took a different approach when it came to
yeah,
communicating the KPIs, the goals
yeah,
to your team.
yeah. And saying, this is, we all need to deliver this together. And how do I help you get to that place where it's not feeling stressful for you to deliver at this level?
Hmm. I wonder as well. It just makes so you need to get to a point where you're comfortable and you know that your standards are realistic. So that would be
Yeah,
the first point in doing some self-reflection and some inner work and thinking, no, okay, these are realistic goals that I'm setting for the team, for
yeah,
the organization. And I suppose as well that everyone perceives you through their own filter, right?
yeah,
That's a reality in the workplace. So you need people who are open to your suggestions and open to your new
yeah.
communication about how you want them to reach the goal. So I guess it could be a bit of a filtering out process as well.
Absolutely. And I think, if you've grown up in industries that do really value perfection, so I think anyone who works in professional services, be that management consulting, any of the big four accountancy firms, legal profession, medical profession, you there is a requirement for a level of perfection. You don't want to turn around and say, well, I'm sorry, your surgery didn't go as well as it could have been. We were just doing 80/20 that day, right? Um, so, the reality is there are many industries that do require a level of perfection. And do they require it every single moment in every single interaction? Possibly not. But it's working out when do we need to really do a big push to be excellent, and when can we relax a little bit sometimes.
Yeah, my husband's a pilot, so I completely
Yes,
understand.
I was going to say that.
We
Yeah,
love perfectionism
you
there.
don't want your pilot to be like, "Sorry, I fell asleep today because
Yeah,
I was
oops.
relaxed."
Yeah.
Yeah,
I remember there was a training that we did when I was back at CNBC, and we had this trainer, and she was helping us with nerves before you go on air because we were
yeah,
young, really nervous. And she used to say, "Oh, you're not flying airplanes. If anything happens, nobody dies. If you make a mistake or you
yeah,
mispronounce something." But when you're in a job like that, like my husband, he comes back and you can tell when there's been turbulence because his face is just the pressure
yeah,
shows when you're in a position. So you're right. Some professions do absolutely um, provide that. So so when you go in and you meet up with a client and they're being really really hard on themselves, Carla, that's
mhm,
always a tough one, right? Because they've
yeah,
accomplished so much, but yet they still don't feel like they've done as much as they could. There's so many, I should be doing this, I ought to be doing,
mm,
should, woulds, coulds. um
yeah.
how do you advise them?
Well, I guess that would be more of that sounds like a coaching conversation, and I probably would shift from advising just to helping them understand maybe some of the belief systems that they've got. Because if I hear a should, a would, a must in anyone's language, then I really want to probe that a little bit and, well, who said you should do this? Why must we do that? And just help people reframe some of their language because if they're saying it out loud to me, they're definitely saying it in their head. So their internal dialogue is running like that all the time, that I must not let people down. I must be perfect. We must always deliver 100% of the time. And even that internal dialogue creates stress. And sometimes I ask people, because there's often a reality that there are some things that they must do. So I will ask them, have people given you that feedback that absolutely should be done that way? And most of the time, people will say, no, nobody's actually told me I have to do that, but I think I have to do that. So then we sort of unpick what's absolutely non-negotiable and what's something that you've imposed on yourself that actually is quite flexible, and you might not need to do all those things all the time.
Yeah, well said, well said. Just reframing, zoom, pulling out,
Yeah,
and taking a look
yeah,
at how hard you're being on yourself.
yeah.
Um, any final thoughts, Carla, before we wrap this up? Any other insights or thoughts that you'd like to add, or advice for anyone watching this right now who who they
Yeah.
might have a tendency to be hard on themselves?
Yeah, I would just ask everybody to just be a little bit kinder to themselves. So there's very few leaders that I come across when I ask them, well, would you hold other people all the time to the standards that you hold yourself? Or would you talk to other people the way you're talking to yourself? They would most often say no. So often, I think we hold ourselves to much higher standards than we'd hold other people to. So just a bit more kindness, a bit more compassion to yourself, and really looking at the different choices you can make. You don't have to be perfect all the time. There might be opportunities where you can relax, and therefore create a bit more of a relaxed culture around you.
Beautifully said, Carla. Thank you. And it's always so beautiful to hear your smooth, calming, reasonable voice. It's just your clients are incredibly lucky to have you.
Thank you. Thanks, Lisa. Thanks so much.